Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a moment in time when power wasn't just measured by armies or coins, but by the color you wore. Picture this moonlight flickering over stone courtyards, the salt of the sea thick in the air, and a sour stench rising from a dye workshop on the edge of the Roman coast. That smell, it's the scent of history unraveling. You're standing barefoot in the wet grit of a dye yard near Tyre. Yes, the city that practically invented the world's most ridiculous luxury. The vats are still warm from the day's labor, but the shelves that usually hold baskets of purple-producing snails, empty. Totally. A few desperate workers dig into the corners of crates, cracking open the last crusty shells, but it's no use. The source of Rome's pride, its power, and its perfectly ridiculous fashion code has just run out. You probably won't survive this. Not if you're one of the dye workers, half of whom are already considering whether to fake a shipment or fake their deaths. The overseer is shouting something about Phoenician pirates, and someone else mutters about divine punishment for disrespecting Neptune. It doesn't help that one of the vats is mysteriously bubbling without fire. Probably best not to ask. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it over there? I love seeing our little history crew stretch across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes adjust to the darkness of the yard. The stars overhead blink faintly through a salty haze, and your hands trace the side of the vat, now empty, crusted with dye residue, the color of dried blood and royal dreams. A slave boy quietly collects broken shells into a basket as if trying to squeeze one last drop of glory from them. You follow him, stepping between discarded tunics and rat-chewed rope until the noise fades behind you. Farther inland, past the smell, you reach a warehouse that should be buzzing with scribes and trade officials tallying barrels of precious dye. But the doors are open and silence echoes inside. The logbooks are abandoned. Even the ink is drying up. You pause at the threshold, noticing something odd: purple footprints. Not painted real. Someone must have spilled dye and walked through it barefoot. You kneel, touching one. Still damp. Someone was here not long ago, and they were either very sloppy or very desperate. Outside, torches bob in the distance. Someone's looking for something or someone. You duck behind a stack of amphorae, heart pounding. A guard calls out in Latin, slurring slightly from wine. Show yourself if you've nothing to hide. You wisely stay silent. History may be full of drama, but no one wants to become the punchline of a toga-clad manhunt. As the torches fade, you make your way down toward the harbor. The moon glints off dozens of docked ships, some still unloading barrels. A few of them smell of fish. One smells worse than fish, and you know exactly what that means. Tyrian dye, or what's left of it. A sailor leans against a mast, chewing what might be fennel. He squints at you. Looking for purple, he asks, grinning without warmth. Ain't none left. Might be some green if you like mildew. You don't answer. Your eyes drift across the pier to a spot where a crate has split open. The snails inside are dried husks, shrunken hollow as if whatever power they once held had evaporated into the sea air. And yet, despite the gloom, something stirs. Whispers from the city. Something is happening in Rome. News travels fast, even on sandal-tired feet. An emergency council, a decree being drafted, rumors that some idiot noble tried to dye his tunic with berry juice and passed it off as royal purple. A scandal is brewing, and it smells worse than the snail vats. You climb a narrow alley that winds up the cliffs toward the merchant quarter. The torches here are fewer, but the windows glow gold. Rich traders, some laughing, some pacing. One man sits hunched over a letter, hands trembling. He holds a sample of cloth, dark reddish, and absolutely not authentic Tyrian. He knows it. You know it. And tomorrow, the Emperor will know it too. You duck past him, making your way through tiled courtyards and fig trees, each step soft on the mosaic paths. A cat darts by, then stops and stares. Even it seems confused, as if wondering where the usual clamor of porters and dye vendors went. At the top of the hill, you reach the shrine of a minor goddess, a temple to beauty and commerce. Offerings lie at her feet, pearls, cloth scraps, coins, and one single shell, a murex snail shell gleaming faintly in the firelight. Left here as a prayer maybe, or a warning. You pick it up. It's empty. Of course. Historians still argue whether the dye crisis began from a real shortage or a cleverly staged political move. Some say the empire wanted to tighten control, raise prices, or distract from famine elsewhere. Others believe it was pure overconsumption, a bubble of vanity that finally burst. You tuck the shell into your pocket. It's cold. You can't tell if it's an artifact or a relic of a scam. Back in the street, bells begin to toll. Midnight in the city. Curfew for some, celebration for others. For you, it's a signal the color war has started. And you're wearing brown. You slip through the cobbled streets just before dawn, passing fountains that burble like they've never heard of imperial fashion crises. But even the water seems quieter this morning. Rome is on edge, and it's not because of barbarians or bread riots. It's because of fabric. Specifically, what's not in the fabric anymore. You're heading toward the Forum, and already there are murmurs in the air like the rustling of togas before a Senate vote. Every whispered conversation seems to orbit the same fear. There's no more purple. Not the deep, bruised violet kind that screams empire divinity and, let's be honest, sheer smugness. The color that told people exactly who was in charge. And now the dye pots are dry. As you round a corner near the Temple of Castor and Pollux, you spot your first purple of the morning, and it's on a statue. An ancient one. The stone folds of a sculpted toga still hold a faint paint stain from centuries back. Purple, royal, untouchable. No need for snails here, just weather-resistant pigment and a prayer that the pigeons miss it. You stop and stare, because suddenly you get it. Why Rome is panicking. Purple wasn't just dye. It was law. By decree, only the emperor and select officials were allowed to wear full Tyrian purple. Even a stripe across the shoulder, a clavis, had to be earned, usually by navigating decades of bureaucracy or backstabbing. And now, if you can't tell who's powerful by what they wear, well, how is anyone supposed to know who to bribe? The color wasn't decoration, it was identification. You pass two senators whispering furiously near the basilica steps. One's gesturing to his tunic, which has clearly been dyed with some kind of berry-based stand-in. It looks like a crushed fig and smells faintly of vinegar. The other senator sighs through his nose like a dying dolphin. It's not regal Marcellus. It's rustic. From their tone, you'd think someone had died. And maybe something has. See the Roman Republic remember that short-lived experiment before emperors took over, once prided itself on simplicity, modesty, plain white togas. But as the empire expanded, so did the closets. Suddenly, the guy with the deepest dye ruled the deepest provinces. Civility, as it turned out, came in shades. Tyrian purple just happened to be the loudest. You stroll through the market as the sun peeks over the rooftops. Stalls are opening slowly today, merchants wary. A fabric vendor lifts a curtain and reveals bolts of cloth, all shades of beige-brown or faded crimson. Not a hint of true purple. His face says he's mourning. Then you see it. A child, maybe 10, racing past in a tunic dyed a suspiciously rich purple. Every head turns. The vendor goes pale. A soldier starts after the boy, shouting, "Stop! Where did you get that?" But the child's gone, vanished into the alleys like a grape on legs. You can't help but grin. That kid might have just worn the most illegal outfit in the empire. Historians still argue whether Rome's obsession with purple was genuinely about sacred symbolism, or if it was just a colossal power flex. Some records suggest the Phoenicians treated it as wholly linked to sea gods and creation myths. Others say Roman aristocrats simply liked making their inferiors feel bland. One thing's clear: when people are told they can't have something, they want it more. And when only one person is allowed to wear it well, that person better hope the snail supply holds. You drift toward the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, where priests are preparing the morning rites, their robes normally edged in imperial purple look off. One priest has substituted a band of dark indigo. It's close, sure, but to the trained eye, and in Rome, every eye is trained to spot power that's practically a war crime. A priest in the corner mutters a prayer while discreetly scratching the dye off his sleeve. You sit on the temple steps watching the city stretch into wakefulness. A breeze carries the sound of arguments, horses, and the occasional slap of a merchant scolding his apprentice. No one's relaxed. Not really. You're watching a society that built its identity on color, and now that color's gone. It's hard to describe just how obsessed Rome was with purple without sounding like you're exaggerating. There were spies sent to check dye purity, guilds formed whose sole purpose was to monitor the authenticity of cloth. There were dye sniffers. Yes, literal humans paid to inhale fabric and determine if it passed the imperial nose test. A scroll in the Temple of Vesta even warned of traitors in plum, meaning those who dared to forge the royal hue. You wonder how many innocent mulberry farmers were clubbed by accident. You step down from the temple as an old woman passes by selling charms. She's got amulets, bone trinkets, even bits of dyed wool. One's still a faint purple. She sees you staring. "Real," she says, "from my grandfather's store, before the wars, before the rationing." You ask her what she'll sell it for. She just laughs. "Sell it, I hide it from the taxmen." She disappears into the crowd, and you're left with the echo of her voice before the rationing. You hadn't thought of that, because when you control the dye, you control the robe. And when the robe means rule, you get scarcity economics. Roman edition. Rome didn't just run out of purple overnight. It crept up like an ink stain spreading over a scroll. More demand, fewer snails, longer trade routes, increasingly questionable substitutes. And every noble trying to elbow their way into imperial fashion meant the price just kept climbing. You remember that senator back near the basilica, the one who looked like he'd rolled in a plum pie? His type would have paid more for a strip of purple than a legionnaire's annual salary. That's not luxury anymore. That's lunacy. And the worst part, people still expected purple. At ceremonies in courts, at executions, there was always a robe, always a signal. Without it, the rituals unravel. You make your way to a small bathhouse tucked between two taverns. Inside, steam clouds the ceiling, and the air smells of oil and politics. 3 merchants are lounging in the water, each in varying degrees of dismay. One grumbles. "My wife tried to boil eggplants last night. Said she was going to make a new purple." Another replies, "Mine tried crushed beetles. We've got ants now, everywhere." The third just sighs. "I'm thinking of moving to Gaul. No one expects purple in Gaul." You sink into the water, closing your eyes. Rome is unraveling, and not because of war or plague or scandal. Because of color. Because a robe lost its meaning. And if purple isn't power anymore, what is? You're still dripping from the bathhouse steam when you head back into the streets, towel slung around your shoulder, and your mind churning with the absurdity of it all. Imagine that an empire feared across continents brought to its knees not by invading armies, but by mollusks. Tiny, grumpy, slow-moving sea snails. The sun is higher now, casting golden light over the marble columns of Rome. You stroll past the fish market, and that's where the scent hits you, a salty, sour funk that instantly hijacks your nose and nearly makes your knees buckle. This isn't your average seafood. No, this is murex, the snail, the source of the fabled purple. There's a stall tucked beneath an awning of patched linen, and behind it is a woman, grinding something that looks like dried slugs into a shallow clay bowl. You walk closer, and she meets your gaze with a look that says, "You're going to regret this." She dips a strip of white cloth into the bowl and lifts it slowly. The dye begins greenish, then turns blue, then deepens to a murky violet black as it reacts to the air. There it is, the ancient magic, the science of imperial fashion. You ask her how many snails it took to dye one toga. She spits into the gutter and mutters, 10,000, if you're stingy. And that's not a joke. Historians still argue whether it was closer to 8,000 or 12 per robe, depending on how intense you wanted your purple to be. Just imagine the logistics fleets of sailors scraping snails off the coast of Lebanon, workers cracking shells with stone hammers and then fermenting the mucus glands in open-air pits for days. Some records say weeks. That smell you noticed? It lingers for generations. You crouch beside a pile of discarded shells. They're brittle-ridged, tinged with a faint purplish sheen. Each one once held the chemical key to power thanks to a specific enzyme, dibromoindigo, that only Murex brandaris snails could produce. Of course, no one in Rome knew the chemistry. They just knew it worked, and that it reeked. Some ancient writers describe the dye shops of Tyre as the worst-smelling places in the world. Livy claimed they made you weep without sorrow. Pliny the Elder, the original cranky science blogger, said workers reeked so foul their wives slept apart. You can see why. Still, the results were mesmerizing. Tyrian purple didn't fade in the sun. It didn't bleed in rain. It deepened over time like wine aging in barrels. And if someone walked into a Senate hall draped in it, every head turned. Even statues would seem to notice. You walk along the riverbank now where bundles of wool are being washed. One young apprentice is scrubbing a tunic and yells across the dock. The color won't hold. The master shouts back. That's because you're using juniper, idiot. The boy looks crushed. Another casualty of the purple panic. In one of the dye houses, a faded mural shows a snail flanked by two dolphins, as if the creature were a sea god in disguise. It might as well have been. For centuries, this humble animal had dictated the terms of Roman hierarchy. Born poor, no purple for you. Climb the ladder, curry enough favor, maybe get a thin stripe. But full imperial purple. Only Caesar could wear that without ending up on a very unfortunate staircase accident. You pass a retired centurion on a bench, his uniform neatly pressed, and on his shoulder a narrow faded line of purple thread. Wore it for 12 years, he tells you, noticing your glance. Still remember the day I earned it. They stitched it by torchlight. Made me cry harder than my wedding. He pulls something from his satchel, a small box, delicate, carved with olive wood. Inside is a single perfect murex shell wrapped in linen. My son'll never see one up close. There's none left on the coast. Scraped clean. Every last one. That part, sadly, is true. The murex snails weren't exactly farmed responsibly. People just ripped them out of the sea and left mountains of shells behind. Some harbors in Phoenicia ended up clogged with discarded mollusks to the point where sailing became difficult. They didn't care. Color was worth it. And now Rome is learning what it means to lose an animal that made its clothes, its symbols, even its ceremonies. Think about it, some temples required offerings in purple cloth. Without the dye, those prayers feel less holy. You can't sacrifice in beige. It just doesn't land. You step inside a tiny tailor shop where a woman is patching together scraps. She barely glances up. "No, we don't have purple," she says flatly before you even speak. "No, we're not taking orders." "No, I can't make it from beet juice." "Yes, we tried." It stains your thighs. You raise your eyebrows and she shrugs. "Senator's daughter. She cried for hours." You ask her what they're doing now, and she nods toward a table where two apprentices are testing dyes from berries bark, even fish scales. The results are mixed. One cloth looks like a storm cloud sneezed on it. Another looks almost respectable until the light hits it and reveals a greenish shimmer that screams, cheap. The woman sighs. Everyone wants to be Caesar, she mutters, but no one wants to smell like a snail pit. As you leave the shop, a thought occurs to you, this whole mess, the snails, the smell, the obsession. It was all about identity. In a place as vast and fractured as Rome, color was a shorthand. Purple meant you belonged to the machine, to the system, to the spectacle. And when the dye runs dry, so does the certainty. You pass a tavern where two men are arm wrestling over a bet which province will invent the next official imperial color. One swears it'll be something golden. The other insists it'll be black to match the mood. You don't stop to vote. You keep walking until you reach a statue of Venus draped in sculpted cloth once painted purple. Faded now. You stand beneath her watching as pigeons coo and bob on her shoulders, and think about how a color could define an empire. Historians still debate whether the dye shortage was a result of over-harvesting disrupted trade routes, or perhaps even a secret imperial maneuver to centralize power. Some suggest the emperor at the time may have hoarded remaining stocks to consolidate control using scarcity not as a problem, but as a strategy. You tilt your head. It makes a twisted kind of sense, because what's rarer than royalty? Royalty with no rivals. You wake up to shouting, not the angry sword-drawing kind, but the sort of panicked bellowing that happens when someone's dye shop catches fire, and they're still inside it wearing half a toga and 0 shoes. You rush into the street, half-eaten fig in hand, and see it thick black smoke curling out from a squat building near the city's outer wall. People are running with buckets, which, as always in Roman emergencies, are mostly decorative. The dye shop is gone, and judging by the smell, so are a few hundred murex snails that were halfway through the fermentation process. Someone yells, arson, another counters sabotage. A third says, it's probably just divine judgment for making clothes out of slime. You take a step closer and gag, because now finally you understand what everyone meant about the stench. The dyeing process was, let's say, unromantic. First, they harvested the snails. Then came the real treat, extracting a tiny gland from each creature's innards and letting it ferment. For days, in giant stone vats, under the sun, sometimes with added urine to help the color develop. Yes, actual urine, preferably aged. You step back from the fire nostrils burning, wondering what kind of society chose that process as the marker of power. You could have just gone with gold, or dragons, or ceremonial hats. But no, Rome chose rotting snail juice. The thing is, the grossness was the point. Historians still argue whether the process itself was deliberately left unpleasant to prevent commoners from replicating it. A kind of olfactory gatekeeping. You want to be emperor great. First smell like a compost pile for 6 years. You leave the chaos behind and wander into the quieter part of town closer to the artisan quarter. There you find an older man stirring something thick and red in a copper pot. He looks up and grins. Not purple, he says before you ask, but it tries. You peer into the pot. The mixture is made of madder root and fig bark. It bubbles politely, not aggressively like snail vats do. He dips a linen strip, holds it to the light. The color is rich, deep, almost regal until the sun hits it directly. Then it turns pink. He sighs. Too honest. Purple should lie to your eyes. That might be the most Roman thing you've heard all day. You sit on a stool as he pours more powder into the pot. He's been at this for decades, he says. Started as a boy cleaning vats. Earned his place in the Guild of Dyers. Taught the craft to his sons now, off trying to make fashion history in Alexandria. He doesn't believe the dye is truly gone. It'll come back, he says. Like the Nile floods. Or bad senators. But there's a catch. There's a limit, he adds. You scrape too much from nature and it remembers. You ask him how many snails he's seen in the past year. He doesn't answer. You leave his workshop and head toward the river. Along the banks, vats sit empty. Children poke at the leftover sludge with sticks. One boy holds up a crusty rag and asks, "Was this royal?" You don't have the heart to answer. You keep walking, and something catches your eye. A poster nailed to a pillar. A decree. Imperial seal. It reads, "Any person caught impersonating imperial dye shall be fined, flogged, or reassigned to the latrine pits of the 6th Legion." Classic Rome. You pass a group of nobles standing near a statue of Augustus. They're arguing loudly about the appropriate shade for ceremonial trim. It should be bluish purple. No, that's too Greek. Maybe we invent a new color. Call it Imperial Grape. Grape is a food Octavian. You move on before they start flinging sandals. It's starting to feel like mass delusion. No one actually remembers what true purple looks like anymore. The last verified robe was sealed in a temple archive years ago, and no one's dared to open it since, probably because doing so would offend 20 different gods, and at least one ghost. You stop at a public fountain and splash water on your face. An old woman beside you washes laundry with a stubborn glare. You notice a scrap of fabric laid out to dry. It's a faded, bruised hue somewhere between eggplant and dusk. She catches you staring. Don't touch. It's legacy. Legacy, you ask. My husband earned that color in battle, she replies. A gift from the governor of Antioch. You nod and back away respectfully. And that's when it hits you, this isn't just about snails or robes. It's about memory. Legacy. A color became a myth, something people inherit like honor or curses. Historians still debate how much of Tyrian dye's allure came from its actual color, and how much was just hype built over centuries. Some suggest it was never that purple to begin with, more maroon or even dark burgundy. But once emperors wrapped themselves in it, perception didn't matter. It became purple because they said it was. Power works like that. As you walk back through the streets, the wind shifts. From the west, you smell something oddly pleasant, lavender. No, not lavender. Just less death. You follow your nose to a tiny garden tucked behind a dye merchant's abandoned house. There, among the weeds, you find several healthy murex snails nestled in a stone basin where water still flows. You crouch watching them slowly move across the basin's edge, glistening with iridescent slime. For a moment, you're alone with the last artists of Roman color. Quiet, patient, ancient. You wonder how long they've been here, hidden away, surviving while the world above panicked and postured. It's tempting to tell someone, but then again, maybe power should be rare. Maybe it should be protected. Maybe for once, it's okay to let the color hide. You stand and step away from the basin. The snails keep sliding indifferent to your epiphany. You head home passing 2 drunk senators arguing over whether beet juice is imperial or treasonous. One of them is definitely bleeding, but insists it's just experimental dye. Somewhere in the distance, the temple bells ring, and Rome, still proud, still ridiculous, keeps marching forward. You wake to the soft rustle of fabric, heavy, luxurious, and entirely too purple for the room you're in. Someone's outside your window whispering. You roll out of bed and press to the wall, listening. 2 voices. One smooth and amused, the other tense and sharp. It's not the same shade, it's too purple. It's the only bolt I've got left. You want to look like an emperor or not? You peek through the shutters. It's early. The streets are hushed, but not asleep, more like the silence before a play begins. A man in a sleeveless tunic is holding up a robe against the morning light. It shimmers. The dye is good. Too good. Definitely forbidden. The buyer frowns. He'll notice. He's blind in one eye. He's the emperor. And that's when it hits you, today's the day. A public procession, a high holiday. The emperor will appear. And that robe, that perfect, perilously purple robe, might just spark something Rome isn't ready for. You throw on your sandals and head out, pulled by curiosity and the irresistible magnetism of spectacle. It doesn't take long to find the crowd. Romans are early risers when parades are involved. The Via Sacra is already lined with citizens in their best togas, some actually clean. A boy walks by carrying figs on a tray dyed an unconvincing lavender. A hopeful merchant nearby hawks scarves labeled Imperial Adjacent Violet. You squeeze through the crowd and find a spot by the steps of the Temple of Saturn. From here, you can see the edge of the Imperial Palace where the procession will begin. Guards stand like marble, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. A distant horn calls out. Everyone hushes. And then, he arrives, the Emperor. Golden laurels on his brow. A stern face carved from decades of ruling, warring, decreeing, and probably yelling at carpenters. But more than anything, your eyes are drawn to the robe. It is glorious. Heavy folds, embroidered stars, and the unmistakable hue of deep Tyrian purple. The crowd doesn't cheer at first, they gasp, like they've just seen a god step out of a statue. You can feel it ripple through the people, awe, envy, reverence, maybe a little fear, because if he has it, and no one else does, what exactly are the rest of you wearing? You glance at the noble beside you. His toga has a plum-colored border, faded fake, and clearly less than legal. He notices your look, tightens his jaw, and adjusts it like someone trying to convince himself it's still fine wine and not grape juice. Historians still argue about moments like this. Did emperors really wear the last of the Tyrian stock in public just to make a point? Or were these staged illusions cloths, over-dyed with cheaper colors and paraded under golden light to give the illusion of royalty? One theory suggests the imperial court had secret reserves of real dye, hidden away, doled out drop by drop for ceremonies, robes, or power plays, not for senators, not for generals, just for the emperor. It's certainly working. He moves like the sun, slow, radiant, untouchable. When he raises his hand, the crowd erupts. Some cheer, others whisper. You even spot a woman sobbing silently into her sleeve, overwhelmed by the sight, or maybe just jealous. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Purple wasn't just a status symbol. It was a weapon, a visual decree that said, you are less than me. It reminded everyone every moment of where they stood. As the emperor walks past, a man near the front bows low, too low. His forehead hits the paving stone with a crack. People recoil. A guard helps him up. Blood trickles from his brow and someone jokes. Now that's a sacrifice. You stay until the end of the procession, watching as priests trail behind waving censers and wearing robes that are almost but not quite the same shade. One catches your eye and gives a slight shake of the head. You can't tell if it's disgust or despair. After the crowd thins, you slip through a side street toward the palace's edge. The servants' quarters are quieter. Here, no one pretends. You hear one muttering, "Wore that thing twice this week already." What's he trying to prove? Another snorts that his snails didn't rot in the sun like ours. In a shadowed corner, two laundry workers argue over whether vinegar can preserve the robe's brightness. It worked on my tunic. Your tunic looks like a bruise. A third joins in, holding a threadbare scrap. He's using something new. I know it. What beetles? No Phoenician ink mixed with powdered silver. Some secret blend. I heard they smuggle it from Cyprus inside olive jars. It's probably nonsense, but that's how myths are born. You wander toward the palace gate past a cart loaded with amphorae. One is cracked open, and inside, just for a moment, you glimpse a swatch of cloth. Purple. Bright. Too bright. Not Tyrian, but something newer. Bolder. A guard catches you staring and narrows his eyes. Move along. You do, but the image stays with you. The emperor's robe. The myth. The smell of something new. Because this might be the beginning of a shift. Maybe Rome's not just mourning the loss of purple. Maybe it's quietly deciding what comes next. Maybe some alchemist or dyer right now is inventing the next imperial color in a corner of the empire. And maybe it won't smell like fermented seafood and human despair. You pass a shop selling tokens of the day's procession, wooden figures in purple cloaks, little jars labeled genuine royal pigment, probably mulberry jam. A boy asks his father if he'll ever wear purple. The man smiles and says, "Not unless you conquer 3 provinces or invent a time machine." You chuckle to yourself and turn toward home. The emperor might have walked like a god today, but somewhere tucked in a barrel, there's a dye merchant praying for a miracle. Somewhere, a senator is weeping into his wine over a robe he can never wear again. Somewhere, a little boy is dreaming in color. And for the moment, just for today, Rome still believes in purple. You spend the next day lurking in the colonnades of the Curia, Julia the Senate House, because if you want to understand how Rome is unraveling, you go straight to the source. The men who wear the togas vote on taxes and argue for 3 hours about which kind of marble makes a floor feel more Republican. They're gathering today for a debate which usually means long speeches, loud finger-pointing, and the occasional food stain on someone's toga. But today's agenda is more chromatic. Word has spread that the purple dye crisis has reached the Senate floor, and the mood is tighter than a patrician's waistband during Saturnalia. You perch on a bench as the first speaker, a squat man with a scroll twice his height, marches to the center and clears his throat. Esteemed colleagues, he begins, I rise today to address a matter of dignity, of tradition, and of hue. Already 3 senators sigh. He goes on. For too long we have tolerated the creeping erosion of our visual code. We are Romans, not Gauls. We do not wear mushroom brown. We are not governed by radish red. We are the Empire of Purple. Murmurs of agreement ripple across the room. And then from the back, a lean senator named Regulus stands. He doesn't speak loudly, but everyone listens. Because Regulus wears the latus clavis, that wide purple stripe down his toga that marks him as one of the few who's supposed to wear the real deal. His voice is calm. And what happens, my friends, when there is no more purple to wear? Silence, like someone unplugged the fountains of rhetoric. Historians still argue whether this session ever happened as recorded. There's one fragmentary source from a bored historian/gossip who loved adding flair, but even if apocryphal, it feels real. Because it captures something crucial. When purple disappeared, Rome didn't just lose a color, it lost a language. Regulus steps forward, sweeping out his toga with slow precision. If my robe fades, he says, does my authority fade too? If the tailor runs out of dye, do I become less senatorial than the man beside me? A few senators shift in their seats. One coughs theatrically, but Regulus adds, if anyone can wear purple, what does that make me? And now the room really shifts. Because this is the question no one wants to say aloud. If everyone's special, no one is. If the dye is gone, the entire hierarchy dissolves into linen chaos. You watch as a debate erupts. Some argue for a temporary allowance permitting burgundy or indigo interpretations of purple until the supply returns. Others scream that this would dilute Roman values worse than barbarian perfume. One suggests a government-sponsored dye ration. Another proposes a registry of who owns legitimate purple fabric, complete with sniffer verification. I will not have my toga sniffed, someone yells. Too late. A law is proposed. Lex Purpurae, the purple law. It would regulate access to substitutes, establish purity inspections, and impose fines for unlicensed plum wearing. One senator goes pale. But my wife just had a cloak made in eggplant. You lean back, soaking in the absurdity. Still, it's not all comedy. There's something deeper going on. Because Roman society was never just about power. It was about the performance of power. And when the costume disappears, the actors don't know their lines. You slip out of the Senate House and wander the nearby streets. A tailor's apprentice stands outside his shop holding 2 bolts of fabric. One a faint violet, the other deep blue. He asks a passerby, "Which one says authority, do you think?" The man shrugs. "Depends who's looking." You continue on and notice something new shops are starting to advertise new purples. Imperial Dusk, Western Wine, Tyrian Twilight. Even Republican Plum, which is somehow both tragic and hilarious. One mural shows Romulus himself draped in a robe that looks suspiciously like boiled beet juice. You can almost hear the artist rationalizing it creative license. It's a metaphor. You duck into a bathhouse where gossip moves faster than steam. 3 matrons are lounging in the caldarium, their voices echoing like swans in a marble tomb. "I heard the emperor's robe isn't even dyed. It's painted." Painted, yes, with crushed sea glass and bee resin that explains why it shimmered. "I thought it was divine aura." No, that was glitter. Definitely glitter. They pause as a young girl walks in wearing a scarf so dark it's almost black. One of the matrons arches a brow. "Careful, child. Wear that in the wrong forum and someone might think you're declaring war." The girl lowers her eyes. "It was my grandmother's, from Antioch." The matrons go quiet, because Antioch was one of the old dye centers, and anything from there might be real. You leave as steam curls past your shoulders and step into the evening air. Rome's torches are being lit, and with their orange glow you notice something eerie. No purple anywhere. Even the banners strung across balconies are red or gold or green. Not royal, not sacred, just colors. You walk back past the Curia Julia. The senators are gone. But on the door, someone has scratched a crude line in wax, a question mark in the shape of a snail shell. You smile, because someone out there is keeping the joke alive. You pass a beggar in rags. He's humming a song, something about emperors and sea monsters. Then he leans close and whispers, "I heard they've found a new snail. Bigger, stinkier, full of juice, east of Cyprus. But the emperor doesn't want anyone to know." You don't believe him, not entirely, but you do note it, because even in a city of marble and monuments, power starts in whispers. And when robes can't speak for you anymore, whispers get louder. By the next morning, you've developed an odd habit. Your eyes search every piece of clothing in every crowd, trying to catch that telltale shimmer, that elusive deep imperial purple. But today, for the first time, you see something stranger. You're walking near the Circus Maximus, where vendors are setting up before the chariot games begin. Everything is dust and heat, and the sound of donkeys regretting their lives. But in the middle of it all stands a stall with a very confident sign. The new purple is orange. You blink. Behind the stall, a young merchant grins like he's discovered fire. "It's bold," he says. "It's brave. It doesn't smell like fermented mollusk. What more do you want?" He holds up a tunic dyed in a fierce sunset orange with golden threading. You swear it shimmers, almost as if mocking the old shade it replaces. "Imported from Parthia," he adds. Saffron turmeric touch of madness. A senator walking past scoffs audibly, but not before glancing twice. You don't buy the tunic, but you do realize something. The scramble to replace purple has truly begun. Historians still argue about this phase in Rome's color identity crisis. Some call it the chromatic interregnum, the moment when Rome, having lost its royal dye, went artistically feral. There are scattered records of emperors trying other colors, a silver robe for one festival, a green-trimmed toga for another. One eccentric governor in Gaul even tried wearing leopard spots to court. It did not end well, for him or the leopard. Back near the Palatine Hill, you stop at a small shop you've passed before, but never entered. It's the kind of place where the windows are always half covered, and there's always incense burning just strongly enough to mask something worse. Inside, the walls are hung with swatches, some faded, some new. The merchant is a woman in her 40s with silver threaded into her braid and eyes like storm clouds. She looks you over. You've come for truth or for dye. You smile. Can it be both? She laughs a short, dry sound and gestures you forward. From under the counter, she pulls a bolt of cloth wrapped in waxed linen. Unfolded, it's beautiful. A deep red violet shot through with black thread. Not quite Tyrian. Not quite fake. It's close, but more than that, it's intentional. A reinterpretation. She tells you it's made from a blend of indigo cochineal and wine leaves. A method learned from traders in Iberia and perfected with what little remains of true Murex base. Hybrid cloth, she says, for hybrid times. You ask her what it costs. She doesn't answer. She just rewraps it carefully and slides it back beneath the counter. Not for sale, she says. It's for remembering. That sticks with you as you leave. For remembering. What happens when a society can't afford its own memory anymore? Rome was always theatrical. From gladiators to triumphal arches, everything was built to say, we matter. We lasted. We are color, sound, flame, and thunder. Purple wasn't just a dye, it was a symbol painted across every surface of Rome's ego. You find yourself wandering toward the Tiber. By the docks, crates are being offloaded. You spot one labeled Murex Rejects. Inside, empty shells, already harvested and cleaned, worthless for dye, but sold as souvenirs. A tourist from somewhere far off Germania maybe holds one up and smiles. I give this to wife. Say Rome fashion. Yes. You nod and say nothing. Further down the quay, you meet someone you weren't expecting, a member of the Vestiari Rome's fabric inspectors. They're not soldiers, but they carry short daggers anyway. Dye smuggling is serious business. He's leaning against a barrel watching a crew unload baskets of what looks like purple-stained moss. You raise an eyebrow. Carthaginian trick, he mutters. They soak linen in sea brine, then mash red berries over it. Add charcoal, let it rot. It almost works. Almost. It fades, like dignity. You ask him how often he catches forgeries. Every day, he says. But that's not the point. You wait. The point, he continues, is to let people think they got away with it. Let them feel royal. Let them wear the myth. Because the moment they believe it, that's when the real control happens. He taps his dagger twice on the barrel, then walks off without another word. You're left staring at the moss. It really does look almost regal. You head into the city again, passing a family of bakers who've dyed their aprons with some kind of purple cabbage concoction. The color's too bright, too cheerful. One of the children beams at you, unaware that a century ago they would have been flogged just for wearing that tint. It's funny how quickly the sacred becomes fashion, and how fast fashion becomes forgettable. You end the day back at the steps of the Pantheon, watching as the sun sinks low and the dome's shadow swallows the square. A man sits beside you and unwraps a small parcel. Inside is a piece of cloth, faded purple, real, old. He doesn't say where he got it. He just asks, "What would you do with the last piece of something sacred?" You don't answer, because that's not your question. That's Rome's. That night, you find yourself drifting down the side streets of Trastevere, away from the patrolled plazas and judgmental marble faces of senators. Here, where ivy crawls up cracked stucco and cats run the rooftops, Rome feels less imperial, more human. You're heading toward a place you've only heard about, the dye cellar, an unofficial name whispered in bathhouses and bakeries, spoken with a mix of amusement and reverence. Supposedly, it's where the outcasts of the dye guilds gather, the ones who couldn't stomach the guild politics, or the Murex stench, or both. You finally find the entrance, a low door behind a wine shop half sunken beneath street level. No sign, just a purple streak painted above the threshold, subtle, almost washed out. You knock. A narrow-eyed man lets you in. "You're late," he says, as if expecting you. Inside, the air is thick with incense and strange herbs. Shelves line the walls, cluttered with jars, fabrics, scraps of scrolls. A fire burns low in the corner where a woman is stirring something that looks like liquefied dusk. The room quiets as you enter. You recognize them not by their clothing, but by their hands, dyers all. Stained fingers, burned knuckles, permanent purple crescents beneath their nails, the true remnants of an empire. A young man offers you wine from a chipped cup. You sip and cough too strong but warming. We're trying fig bark this week, he says. Tastes like ambition. You ask them if they've heard any news about the dye shortage ending. A fresh source? A new snail? A chemical miracle? They laugh. One woman leans forward. The dye's not coming back, she says. At least not the way you remember it. But she adds that might be a good thing. You raise a brow. She explains. It made people lazy. Obsessed. It turned cloth into politics and politics into theater. Now they have to think. They have to make. Experiment. Fail. Risk their egos on weird mushrooms and fermented lichen. This isn't a crisis. It's a rebirth. You glance around the room again. The jars hold reds, browns, greens, even a blue so dark it almost fools the eye. Not Tyrian, but not nothing. You ask if they still work with snails. A few shake their heads. One man mutters, I used to dream about them. Woke up smelling seawater for years. Another says, if the gods wanted us to smell like a fish market, they'd have made it a sacrament. But then from the shadows, a soft voice speaks. I still do. Everyone turns. An older woman with a cane hobbles closer to the fire. Her robes are patchworked fragments of color from every failed dye you can imagine, but she holds in her hand a small pouch tied with cord. She opens it slowly and tips the contents into her palm. 3 perfect murex shells. From a secret inlet, she says. North of Carthage, still untouched. But only a few remain. If I harvest them, it ends. If I protect them, the memory lives. You hold your breath. The room does too. Historians, she says, like to write endings. But dyers know better. Color fades. But if you know how to layer it, it never disappears. The fire pops softly. No one speaks. You leave the cellar hours later, hands stained with something that might be elderberry mind spinning faster than a merchant's wheel. Outside, the moon is high. Rome glows in silver and stone. You walk toward the river needing air and stop when you hear humming. A group of laundresses sit by the bank scrubbing garments on the rocks. Most are pale and ragged. One robe, though, lies folded carefully beside them, trimmed with purple so deep it looks almost black in the moonlight. Real, you ask? One of them shrugs. Does it matter? And maybe it doesn't. Because here's the secret. No one in the Curia, the palace or the temple wants to admit. The more Rome chased its sacred color, the more it slipped from their fingers. But out here, among the dyers, the forgers, the dreamers, something new is growing. Not purple, maybe, but just as powerful. You sit by the river, watching the reflections dance. In the water, you see flames, then shells, then robes, then laughter. And through it all, the pulsing, steady truth. Color is never just color. It's memory. It's rebellion. It's rebirth. The next morning, you wake with a tickle in your throat and a smear of unknown dye on your sleeve. Either you slept on a rogue swatch of experimental fabric, or someone at the dye cellar tried to bless you in your sleep. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing that's happened this week. Today you're off to Ostia, the port where Rome breathes. If purple dye came from anywhere, it passed through here. You join a caravan heading toward the coast, and the closer you get, the more it smells like fish sweat ambition and suspiciously flavored wine. Ostia is chaos in columns, crates everywhere, ships bobbing in the harbor, traders shouting in Greek Latin and angry hand gestures. But you're not here for garum or amphorae. You're looking for fakes. Not counterfeit coins, those are boring. You're looking for forged purple. You follow the scent less of the classic snail death bouquet, more berry and despair. And there, behind a stack of olive oil jars, you find it a man, stirring what looks like old wine mixed with something. Crushed beetles, mold, broken dreams. You ask him what he's selling. He lifts a glass vial. inside a syrupy liquid with an alarming shimmer. Substitute dye, he says proudly. Looks just like Tyrion if you squint and only wear it at night. You raise a skeptical eyebrow. Perfect for weddings, executions, minor treason, he adds with a wink. You peer into the box behind him. Bottles, bolts of cloth, and most curiously, a pile of empty Murex shells carefully cracked. He follows your gaze. Decoration only, or evidence depending on who's asking. He leans close. You want real purple? You gotta go inland now, closer to the sources. The coastal beds are scraped clean, and just like that, your mission changes. Historians still debate how quickly Rome's coastlines were picked dry. Some say it took decades. Others argue the collapse came in a single season when panic triggered overharvesting so intense that even the barnacles gave up. You make your way to the waterfront where a boat has just docked from Tyre. Dock workers are offloading crates with seals you don't recognize. You climb aboard casually, confidently, and find the captain sipping wine from a goblet with chipped gold paint. He eyes you. You looking to buy beg or bribe? News, you say. He snorts. News costs more than wine. You pay him with gossip, tell him about the new orange trend in the city, about the girl with the scarf from Antioch, about the rumor that someone's hoarding the last snails in Carthage. He listens, smiles, then leans back. They're lying, he says. You wait. There are no more snails. Not the good kind. Phoenicia's beds are dead. Libya's been scrubbed. Even the Black Sea smugglers are trying to pass off whelks. You ever die with a whelk? No. It's like asking a goat to play the lyre. It'll try, but mostly it just poops. You chuckle. He tosses you a small parcel. Fake, but good. Show it to the wrong senator, you'll either get promoted or stabbed. You thank him and leave. As you walk back toward the central docks, you notice something strange, rows of amphorae filled with nothing, just air and scraps, stained wool, empty shells. A few contain water, as if someone's pretending to be dye merchants. You ask a porter what's going on. He shrugs. It's all theater now. No one wants to admit they've got nothing to sell, so they pretend to be selling something. Helps keep the taxes lower. Rome. In one alley, you watch a fight break out between two smugglers arguing over a shipment of rare eastern purple. The crate tips and out spills cabbage pulp and ink-stained cloth. One of them just stares at it and mutters, "Well, it looked convincing." You slip away before someone decides to start testing your robe. As the sun dips low, you find yourself in a quiet courtyard behind the port warehouse. Here, away from the clamor, a single crate sits unopened, marked with the seal of a merchant family you vaguely remember from your Senate watching days. You check for guards. None. You open the lid. Inside 3 bolts of cloth. And an odd smell. You touch the fabric. It's soft. Heavy. The color catches the light. Not red, not blue, something in between. Real. It's hard to say, but it feels right. And for a moment, just a moment, you understand why people went mad for this. Why emperors clung to it. Why smugglers risked storms and senators risked scandal. Because this cloth doesn't just say status. It whispers, I belong to something eternal. You let the lid fall shut. No one should know this crate exists. Not yet. As you board the cart back to Rome, the driver complains that his wife tried dyeing his socks with grape skins, and now the dog won't come near him. You nod sympathetically and watch the stars rise over the road. Ostia slips behind you, and ahead in the distance, Rome still burns its torches against the dusk, searching, wanting, pretending, and wondering if the next robe it crowns will be dyed with truth, or just a very, very convincing lie. You return to Rome just in time for a storm. Not a thunderstorm, though the sky does look like it's thinking about one. No, this storm brews in marble halls and curtained chambers in hushed voices and clinking goblets. It starts with a whisper. The emperor's robe was off color. And just like that, the entire city loses its mind. You're standing in the forum watching as two palace scribes nearly come to blows over whether the robe worn in yesterday's procession was too red or not red enough. One insists it was dignified burgundy, the other claims it was practically wine-stained linen. Neither agrees on what it should have been. A child nearby holds up a wax tablet with a crude drawing of the emperor's stick legs, and all wearing a robe labeled purplish underneath. You head toward the Palatine Hill, hoping to get closer to the chaos. Along the way, you hear rumors blooming like mold on cheese that the emperor's tailor was arrested, that the robe was imported illegally, that someone found a beetle wing sewn into the hem. But none of those rumors compare to what happens next. Because when Caesar himself emerges from the palace gates surrounded by guards, scribes, and a delegation from Alexandria, he's not wearing purple at all. He's wearing white. Just a simple, perfectly pressed, utterly colorless toga. The crowd goes silent like someone just dropped a cup in a library. Historians still debate whether this move was strategic genius or royal meltdown. Some say the emperor wore white to reset the hierarchy, to remind everyone that he defines what matters, not some sea creature's secretions. Others argue it was pure panic, a signal that Rome had run out of options and he knew it. But in the moment, it's surreal. You watch him walk through the crowd, chin-high, expression unreadable. No embroidery, no trim, no golden thread. Just blank dignity. He might as well be naked. And yet, no one dares laugh. That's power. After he passes, conversation erupts like a burst dam. Some praise his humility. Others call it a sign of weakness. One senator mutters, "I wore white last week, and they told me I looked like a bureaucratic ghost." You duck down an alley to catch your breath, only to find a street artist repainting a mural. Yesterday, it showed Mars, god of war, draped in rich violet. Today, he's bare-chested, holding a white tunic like it's about to bite him. Trend shift, the artist explains without looking up. Patrons said to keep it neutral until the Senate decides what's actually legal. You ask if he misses painting purple. He snorts. "I miss knowing what color won't get me arrested." That evening, a secret gathering takes place in the garden atrium of a wealthy merchant's estate. You sneak in posing as a flute player. No one asks you to play thankfully. Inside, a half-dozen senators, 3 retired generals, and a priest with an indecisive beard are drinking spiced wine and arguing about what to do next. "It's a color," one of them says. "A color, not a god." Exactly, someone responds. "Which is why we should control it. Not the sea, not snails. Us." A proposal is made at council to determine Rome's new ceremonial palette. "Call it the chromatic senate," someone jokes. "Don't tempt fate," replies the priest. They debate red, too violent, green, too Gallic, gold, too Eastern, black, too funeral, blue, too democratic. They land eventually on a color called imperial smoke, a grayish-violet tone achieved by mixing leftover dye with ash and wine sediment. You manage not to laugh. One of the senators pulls a scrap from his sleeve and passes it around. It's fine, soft, subtly gleaming. Everyone agrees it might work, but someone else mutters it won't fool the people. They know what real purple looked like. That's silence again, because that's the problem, isn't it? People remember. Even when the dye is gone, even when the robes fade, memory clings. You leave the atrium under cover of night-heart racing thoughts spinning. Rome is in free fall not because of war or famine, but because it doesn't know what color to wear in the morning. Back on the street, you pass a tailor's shop where the window is covered in parchment that reads, "Closed until tone is agreed upon. No refunds, even for almost purple." Outside, 2 women argue, but it looked imperial until it rained. Then it looked like beet soup. You keep walking. At a fountain, a child floats a strip of dyed linen on the surface. It sinks slowly, color leaching out in soft ripples. The child watches, mesmerized. "It was supposed to be for my doll," she says. You kneel beside her. She'll understand. The girl nods solemn. As you rise to leave, you hear the bells of the Temple of Concord ring out. A rare sound. Something's being decided. You don't know what, but you know this: the robe may have changed. But the hunger for meaning, the need for something to stand in for power, for pride, for place that hasn't gone anywhere. Rome still needs its purple, even if it has to fake it, rename it, or bleach it white. You wake up early the next day with a new mission: get out of Rome. Not permanently, just far enough to see what the empire looks like when you step outside the marble and mirage echo chamber. Because while the capital weeps over dye pots and toga tomes, the provinces might be doing something even more shocking: not caring. You head east with a small merchant caravan bound for a sleepy outpost called Hispella, somewhere between wheat fields and irrelevance. The travelers aren't senators or stylists. They're bakers, potters, candle makers, the sorts who earn their coin in honest labor and spill wine on their robes without ceremony. You sit beside a woman weaving baskets. She squints at your tunic. City dye. You nod, half proud, half ashamed. She smirks. Looks expensive. Smells like cabbage. Out here, nobody's pretending their fabric means anything more than warmth. You stop in Iridium, then Beneventum, then onto the smaller markets where cloth sellers hawk goods in cheerful hues: yellows, greens, rusty oranges. Everything except purple. You finally ask a trader why. He shrugs. Too political. You cock your head. Last time I sold a violet scarf, a traveling tax collector fined me for impersonating nobility. Said I was confusing the visual hierarchy. He makes air quotes like he's mocking a poorly written decree. Another merchant chimes in. A man wore a plum sash in Puteoli last month, and someone tried to arrest his donkey for subtle messaging. You laugh. They don't. So this is what it's come to. A color so loaded with meaning people would rather just not deal with it. Historians still debate how the dye laws were enforced outside Rome. Some say they became toothless outside the city walls. Others argue they were over-enforced away for minor officials to flex power in places where toga width didn't carry weight. In one small village, you watch a wedding procession. The bride wears a deep red dress edged with green embroidery, her hair braided with coins. No one wears purple. No one even glances toward the color. But the joy, undeniable. You sit next to an old woman shelling peas and ask if anyone ever wore Tyrian here. She snorts. Why would we? We're not statues. You move on. Eventually, you reach a governor's villa outside a port town. It's ostentatious, sun-bleached, and full of imported nonsense. The guards are bored. The peacocks are louder than the fountains. But you're here for one reason. The rumors say this man is hoarding purple dye. You sneak in through the garden, classic ivy climb maneuver, and find a storage room tucked behind the bath complex. Inside, barrels, sealed, heavy. You crack one open, fabric, deep violet, the real thing. You'd bet your sandals on it. Footsteps, you freeze. The governor walks in mid-conversation with an aide. And when the capital is desperate enough, he says we name our price. They'll pay anything. Twice. The aide nods, scribbling furiously. But not yet, the governor adds. Let them sweat. Let them parade in cabbage leaves and beetroot dreams. Then we step in. As saviors. You duck behind a column, heart thudding. So there it is. The provinces do care. Some of them at least. But not because they miss the majesty. Because they see profit. You sneak back out without being seen, slipping past the kitchen servants and an oddly judgmental goat. That night, you sit by the fire in a waystation tavern watching traders play dice. One throws double sixes and yells, "Imperial luck." Everyone groans. He grins. Do we even have an empire anymore? Someone mutters. That's the thing, isn't it? When Rome loses the symbols that bound it, the purple, the marble, the ritualized pretense, what's left? You close your eyes and remember the dye seller. You remember the emperor in white. You remember the crate in Ostia, the girl with the legacy scarf, the senators arguing over grape juice. Rome's still Rome, but it's shifting. Color, for all its beauty, is a language, and when the words change or disappear, you either relearn how to speak or you shout louder and hope no one notices the silence. As dawn rises, you begin the road back to the capital. Along the way, you pass a group of children playing outside a vineyard. They're dressed in rags. None of it matches. Some of it's barely cloth. One boy wears a sash of cloth dyed with crushed mulberries. "Are you a prince?" you ask him. He shrugs. "No, but it's my turn." "Your turn." "Yeah," he says proudly. "We take turns being in charge of the game. Whoever has the sash gets to decide who fights the Hydra." You blink. "So you just made purple mean something else." He grins. "Why not?" You watch him run off, cape flapping behind him like legend. And you wonder, maybe the Empire isn't dying. Maybe it's just playing a new game. You're barely back in Rome when you hear the shouting. A crowd has gathered near the Basilica Aemilia just off the Forum. Two guards stand at attention while a well-dressed man yells indignantly, his cheeks the color of undercooked boar. "I am not impersonating anyone," he bellows, gesturing wildly at his tunic, a handsome thing with a ribbon of reddish purple down one sleeve. "This is plum. Plum is not imperial. It's fruit." The guards look unimpressed. One of them crosses his arms. You are seen walking through the temple district, with a cloak, with shimmer. "It's beetroot," the man screeches. You edge closer as the crowd murmurs. A woman beside you mutters, "He's a linen merchant from down the Tiber. Always thought he was too good for plain beige." Someone else whispers, "I heard he bought a forged dye permit from Alexandria, paid 3 donkeys and a silver comb." The guards begin to escort him away. He shouts over his shoulder, "I'll appeal this to the Emperor, to the Chromatic Senate." The crowd laughs. You don't, because beneath the mockery, there's a chill. The kind of chill that comes when a joke stops being funny, when color becomes a crime. You follow the guards as they lead the man through a narrow alley. At the end, a small tribunal has been set up. 3 officials sit behind a folding table. No marble, no ceremony, just ink-stained fingers and sour expressions. The accused stumbles through his defense, claims he didn't know the dye source, claims it faded in the wash, claims his tailor had bad lighting. None of it matters. One official speaks Article 9 of the Lex Purpurae, prohibits the use of any hue, pigment, or sheen which may reasonably be construed as imperial. They confer briefly. Verdict: fine of 10 denarii, confiscation of garment, temporary loss of market stall license. The man goes pale. "I'll lose my business." "Then perhaps next time," the clerk says without looking up, "you'll choose beige." They strip the tunic from him on the spot. He's left standing in his undershirt, clutching a bundle of faded receipts. As the crowd disperses, you linger. Historians still argue about how many of these cases actually occurred. Some claim they were rare, symbolic performances. Others suggest they were disturbingly common and served not to enforce fashion law, but to remind everyone who controlled the narrative. The tribunal's scribe beckons the next defendant. This time it's a shoemaker. Her crime: violet stitching. You can't help it, you laugh. Quietly, but enough that the scribe glances up. You slip away. Down the street, a graffiti artist is painting over an older mural. The original showed Romulus and Remus swaddled in purple blankets. The new version, they wear green and orange. "I got tired of repainting it after each fine," he mutters. You offer him a fig. He accepts. You wander toward the Subura district, where laws move slower and life moves faster. Here you find a tailor's shop, still open, still brave. Inside, a young woman is working on a new commission, a senator's formal robe to be worn under heavy golden armor. She shows you the trim. It's not purple, it's gray. Silver-threaded charcoal, she explains. Neutral, regal, non-threatening. Doesn't cause riots. We call it Imperial Shadow. It's beautiful and completely empty of meaning. You sit while she sews. The rhythmic sound of needle through cloth is oddly calming. She sighs. I miss the days when purple was just expensive, not dangerous. You ask her what the nobles are doing now. She scoffs, panicking, buying blues, hoarding pomegranate skins. One senator came in last week with a scarf dyed from Squid ink. Did it work? It worked for about 10 minutes. Then it rained. You leave her with a promise to return. Back on the street, a pamphlet catches your eye, flapping in the breeze. Crimes of the Cloak, a citizen's guide to illegal dyes. It's illustrated. It includes swatches. It's color-coded. You flip through it. At least 5 of your own garments might be in violation. Further down the road, you pass a group of schoolboys reciting legal codes from memory. Lex Purpuri Section 3. A citizen may not wear, display, or commission any shade between the hue of dry wine and wet ink unless granted license by a magistrate censor or one-eyed oracle subject to revision. They chant it like it's a nursery rhyme. You shake your head. Rome's obsession with order has officially curdled into farce. Later, in a quiet corner of the Aventine Hill, you watch a priest bless a newly carved statue. The sculpture is covered with a cloth. The priest lifts it carefully. The cloth is gold, not purple, not even close. The people cheer anyway, and you think maybe Rome isn't losing purple. Maybe it's replacing it with pageantry, spectacle, noise. Maybe it always was noise. You remember the boy in the village taking turns with the sash. You remember the governor's secret stockpile. You remember the woman at the dye cellar who said the dye was never coming back, but the art might survive. And you realize the truth. Color was never the power. It was just the costume. You decide it's time to go to sea, because if the dye didn't come from Rome and the senators aren't dyeing their togas in the Tiber, thank the gods, then the truth must be floating somewhere on salt water. You head down to the docks at Portus Rome's massive spiraling port complex where trade ships crowd into the harbor like overbooked guests at a dinner party. It smells like fish guts, lamp oil, and ambition. You talk your way onto a cargo galley bound for Cyrene, promising the captain you're a customs inspector. You're not, but your tunic is just wrinkled enough to look official. He doesn't ask questions. Most sailors don't, especially when they're smuggling something. The sea air clears your head. For a few hours, you forget about robe trials and grape-stained scandals. The crew laughs and sings, and you learn more about sea snails in one evening than in a year of Senate debates. They used to scrape them by the thousands off the Phoenician coast, the helmsman tells you. Now you're lucky to find 10, and half of those are already empty. What happened? He shrugs. Greed. Weather. Overpicking. Some say the gods cursed us for turning slime into gold. Another sailor leans in. You ever see a Tyrian dye run? It's like watching a sunset bleed into the sea. They go quiet after that. You dock 2 days later on the North African coast where desert and sea meet in a shimmer of heat. At a sleepy port town near Cyrene, you finally meet the people still trafficking in purple, though not in the way you expected. A wiry man with a sun-scorched face greets you. He leads you down a dune path to a warehouse with heavy linen curtains drawn tight against the sun. Inside, it's dark, damp, and quiet, like stepping into the lungs of the earth. Barrels line the walls. Crates are stacked ceiling high. A faint scent of brine clings to everything. This is where the good stuff ends up, he says. You point to a sealed jar. Is it real? He lifts the lid. You lean in. The smell hits you like a fist of low tide and regret. Oh, it's real. He grins. He explains the route smuggled by boat to Crete, offloaded by donkey under moonlight disguised in wine shipments passed through 3 bribed inspectors and sold to exactly 1 Roman senator with enough coin and no allergies. You ask how much. He names a number that makes your teeth hurt. Does anyone actually pay that you ask? He nods. Not for the dye, for the symbol, for the illusion that they're still inside the circle of power. Historians still argue how far the black market purple trade extended after the official collapse of Tyrian production. Some believe shadow routes existed from Egypt to Gaul, using everything from goat intestines to hollowed scroll tubes to smuggle tiny ampules of dye concentrate. The merchant hands you a scrap of cloth dipped in his best batch. It's rich, deep, nearly black in the shadows, but held to the light, it flickers with that unmistakable glow, Tyrian-born, centuries deep. sea-swept and sacred. This, he says, gets someone a seat at the wrong table or a knife in the back. You fold it carefully and tuck it into your pouch. On your return to the ship, you pass an old woman drying snails on a wicker mat. She waves at you. "You looking for truth or trouble?" she asks, echoing the dyer in the cellar back in Rome. You smile. "Just purple." She chuckles. "Same thing." Back at sea, the crew shares more legends. One sailor swears he saw a robe so purple it made a bishop faint. Another tells you about a noble who bathed in wine to mimic the dye dyed purple, but also just died. The sky darkens, and as you sail past Sicily, you spot distant fires on the horizon. A port burning. A ritual gone wrong. No one knows. No one stops. By the time you dock back in Ostia, Rome feels different. Not because it's changed, but because you have. You've seen where the last drops of purple go. You've seen who risks their lives to carry them. And more importantly, who's willing to fake it. You walk past a market where a vendor hawks imperial dye dust, clearly just grape pulp with charcoal. People buy it anyway. You stop outside a bathhouse where a mural now depicts Neptune weeping into the sea, surrounded by empty snail shells. The caption, "He gave us the color. We ruined the sea." Inside, you find a group of travelers sharing dye stories. One claims a cousin dyed his tunic with crushed violets and lemon and passed it off as royal until it rained. Another swears the emperor has a private snail farm, underground, beneath the forum. You sip hot wine and don't say a word. Sometimes myth is more useful than fact. Later that night, you unfold the cloth scrap from Cyrene. You hold it to the torchlight. It glows quietly. No fanfare, no trumpets. Just a whisper from the past staining your fingers as if to say, you are holding something that once changed the world. And tomorrow, you'll carry that color back into Rome. Let's see who notices. You don't sleep much that night. The purple scrap from Cyrene lies folded on the stool beside your cot, but it feels heavier than gold. Like it knows it shouldn't be here. Like it remembers being royalty, and now it's hiding in a backpack that smells like street figs and travel sweat. When you step outside, Rome is waking slowly. The streets are still damp from an early drizzle. Marble gleams. Statues look smug. Everything smells like damp stone and unspoken tension. You head to the forum. Something's different. The vendors aren't shouting. The crowds aren't jostling. Even the geese in the temple courtyard seem unusually dignified. And then you see it. The emperor's standard, normally a deep plum flag fluttering high above the rostra, is gone. In its place is a blank white banner. No crest, no trim. Just cloth pale as ash waving in the breeze. People gather beneath it murmuring. A woman whispers, "Is this mourning?" A man mutters, "It's surrender." Someone else bolder says, "It's fashion suicide." You don't know what it is, but it feels like something has cracked. You wander north past the statue-lined avenues and toward the dye quarter, or what's left of it. The buildings are shuttered. The vats are dry. A few dye workers sweep the alleys, eyes hollow. One of them eyes your satchel. "What's in the bag?" he asks. "Bread, you lie." He doesn't press. You make your way down to the riverfront where the old snail processing yards once ran like blood through the city's economy. Now just piles of broken shell, shattered murex, a cemetery of color. You crouch beside one of the heaps. Run your fingers over the cracked fragments. Some still shimmer faintly as if mourning what they once were. A boy approaches barefoot and curious. Were these the ones he asks? You nod. He shrugs. They don't look like they could do anything important. Exactly. Historians still argue about the ecological devastation Rome caused in its hunger for dye. Some say certain coastal regions were permanently altered, biodiversity, lost ecosystems, wrecked all for the sake of prestige robes and triumphal tunics. Others claim the snails might have bounced back if only the demand had ever let up. You stand and brush off your hands. In the boy's eyes, you see something strange disinterest. To him, this is history, already irrelevant. The capital might still ache for purple, but the next generation doesn't even know what it meant. You head toward the Aventine, where the hilltop estates look down on the city like bored gods. You're meeting someone. The courier's name is Piso, and he's part of the Emperor's extended logistics network, a glorified mailman with a seal and a talent for discretion. You sit with him in a quiet courtyard beside a marble fountain shielded by citrus trees. He doesn't say much, just pulls a scroll from his satchel, reads it silently, then hands you a note. Official imports of Tyrian dye have ceased indefinitely. No substitutes recognized. Royal garments to be maintained privately. No public replacements approved. In other words, purple is over. You hand Piso the scrap from Cyrene. He unfolds it, eyes it, holds it to the light. Then carefully he dips it in the fountain. The water blooms violet just faintly. The smell is unmistakable. You know what this means, he says softly. You nod. If anyone else sees this, your tongue ends up somewhere separate from your body. You nod again. Piso gives you back the damp scrap and rises. Keep it, or burn it. Either way, it's not currency anymore. He walks off. You sit in silence for a long while. Around midday, you find yourself wandering toward the market at the base of Capitoline Hill. There, a young woman sells scarves dyed with something new. It's hard to describe the color. Not purple, not blue, not anything Rome would have understood 50 years ago. It's bold, muted, woven with confidence, not deference. Imported technique, she says. Parthian indigo layered with walnut husk, and get this bee pollen. You raise your eyebrows. It catches light differently in the rain. You touch it. It feels like tomorrow. She hands you a swatch. No one's enforcing anything this week. They're too busy arguing over standard marble colors for temple renovations. You thank her and walk away. It starts to rain. The fabric in your hand shifts shade just slightly. It hums with possibility. That evening, Rome lights its braziers. The white imperial banner is still up. People begin to gather near the rostra again, not to protest, not to worship, just to watch. The emperor emerges. No fanfare, no music, just him. In a robe that is, wait, you blink. It's not purple, but it's something close, something shadowy and strange, like smoke curling through twilight. 100 dyes layered into one, impossible to name. You can't help but grin. He didn't bring purple back. He created a ghost of it. A reminder, a warning, a statement. The crowd doesn't cheer. They murmur. They lean forward. They notice. You turn away before the ceremony ends. Rome is still Rome, vain, theatrical, layered in politics and powdered rituals. But today, something shifted. Not backward, not forward, sideways, toward reinvention. As you walk through the rain, the Cyrene scrap in your pocket presses gently against your hip. You don't need to show it. Not anymore. You know what it means. And that's enough. You step into the narrow back streets near the Esquiline Hill, where the air smells of wet stone, old bread, and mild distrust. Roofs drip. Laundry sags. Somewhere, a donkey sneezes theatrically. And everywhere you look, you see color, just not that color. Rome has shifted almost overnight. As if the capital, exhausted from waiting for the return of purple, has quietly decided to move on. Cloaks of ochre tunics, of smoky green stoles of burnished bronze. A man brushes past you in what might be crimson, but it's closer to rust and no one stops him. But not everyone is ready to let go. You reach the workshop of an alchemist rumored to be the last legitimate experimenter with organic dye in the city. The sign out front reads, "Only ideal in memory." Inside, glass jars line the walls. The smell is sharp vinegar, mildew petals, smoke. On a low table, pressed flowers are being dried next to bark scrapings and a jar of snail shells that have long since lost their purpose. The alchemist is older than the forum steps, with fingers stained in gradients you can't name. He greets you with a glance, then gestures to a stool. Looking for purple? You hesitate. Maybe. He nods, unsurprised. You're the 7th this week. He hands you a scroll. A record of experiments, wine lees, and iris root. crushed elderberries mixed with charcoal ash, pomegranate skin aged under clay, and the most curious entry, lavender petals plus honeycomb soot plus indigo, caedoum, faint dusk possible substitute, lasts 6 days in sunlight. You ask him why he's still chasing it. He smiles faintly. It's not the dye I want. It's the process. The act of searching. He opens a drawer and pulls out a cloth. You lean in. It's not purple, but it's not purple. It's bruised twilight, violet regret, ink-stained parchment, a color that mourns and dares at the same time. Almost can be beautiful, he says, even if it doesn't win ceremonies. You buy a scrap and leave. On your way down the hill, you pass a temple to Minerva. A ceremony is in progress. The priestesses wear robes of dove gray with thin blue edging. Not an ounce of purple. And yet it looks right. The color of thought, of quiet strength, of letting go. Historians still argue whether Minerva's cult ever embraced purple. Some claim they rejected it entirely, favoring cool tones as a symbol of discipline. Others say the goddess herself once cursed a dye merchant for overcharging her followers and turned his robes permanently beige. You stop to listen as the head priestess raises her voice. Color fades, wisdom remains. The crowd bows their heads. You head west and find yourself in the Campus Martius, where soldiers train in the drizzle. The centurions bark orders. New recruits run drills in soaked tunics. The only color in sight is mud. But on the outer edge of the field, a captain watches silently. His cloak is long, heavily embroidered, and at its center a trim of dark, subtle hue nearly indistinguishable from the rest. You approach. He notices. It's not real, he says before you even ask. But it's for the memory of those who earned it. He tells you a story about his old commander, a man who wore Tyrion on his shoulders into every battle. Not because he was allowed to, but because he believed in what it stood for: order, valor, Rome as an idea. After he died, they buried the robe with him. No one's touched real dye since. But we still train like we do, the captain says, because the color isn't what made him worthy. The weight of it did. You sit with that. You walk along the Tiber as the rain stops. The river is high and murky. The bridges slick with mist. You pass a boy drawing on a wall with a piece of red clay. He's sketching a figure, a person with a long cloak. You ask who it is. Emperor, he says simply. Where's his color, you ask? The boy shrugs. He doesn't need it. He's got a sword. You ask if he wants to be emperor. He laughs. Nah, I want to be the guy who makes the cloaks. You smile. At dusk, you return to the Curia, where a special meeting of the Senate is underway. You don't go in. You just watch the comings and goings. The robes are varied now. Some plain, some richly dyed in anything but purple. And yet no one looks less important. If anything, they look freer. A senator walks past in a robe of pale indigo, the color of a sea storm right before it breaks. Someone whispers, "He wore violet for 20 years. This is the first time I've seen him without it." Another replies, "He looks younger." Back in your lodging, you unfold the alchemist's cloth. You hold it to the firelight. The color flickers between shadow and plum. It's beautiful. It's temporary. And it was made by human hands, not sea creatures. You realize maybe the mistake wasn't in chasing purple. Maybe it was forgetting how to create it. You wake to a sound you haven't heard in days. Laughter. Real, belly-deep, eye-wrinkling laughter. It's coming from the public baths just across the square. Normally those baths echo with political gossip, half-truths, and arguments about soap prices. But today, it sounds like someone told a joke that actually landed. You wander over, curiosity piqued. Inside the caldarium is full of steam and stories. You slip into the warmth, and a man waves you over. You're late. He says you missed the argument about bees. You raise an eyebrow. Bees. He nods solemnly. Apparently, they're why we lost purple. And that's how you learn today's theory. A group of scholars had gathered at the Temple of Apollo to discuss the true cause of the dye's disappearance. The usual suspects were named overharvesting, economic mismanagement, fishy guild monopolies. But then one particularly confident man stood up and declared it was the bees. According to him, the bees of the Mediterranean had a role in keeping snail populations in check. Something about pollen flow, coastal flower distribution, and symbiotic cycles. When the bees vanished or shifted routes, the ecological balance broke. The snails overproduced mucus, died en masse, and poof, no more purple. Another scholar stood up and shouted, "That's entirely speculative." To which the bee man replied, "So was the Republic, and look how that turned out." The whole room reportedly erupted. Historians still argue about the real ecological collapse behind the dye shortage. The bees' theory is niche, fringe, even. But it speaks to a bigger truth when people can't control the narrative, they invent new ones. And Rome loves a good story, even if it involves angry insects with a vendetta against fashion. After the baths, you head toward the archive hall. Today's a public reading of proposed amendments to the Lex Purpurae, the infamous law that governs dye usage. Inside, a clerk reads off a scroll like it's cursed. Amendment 12. Clarification on legally acceptable adjacent hues. Deep mauve now considered permissible in funerary contexts. A senator stands. Define deep. A magistrate sighs. It's been described as the color of wine after 2 days of exposure to air and regret. The senator grunts. Acceptable. Amendment 13. Any attempt to recreate Tyrian hue using flower-based pigments must be approved by the Office of Aesthetic Legitimacy. A chorus of groans follows. Then comes Amendment 14. All previously illegal garments may be worn within private property, as long as said garments are not visible from a public street rooftop or higher moral ground. That one gets a laugh. You slip out during Amendment 15, something about tunic hem length, and wander toward the outer districts. There you visit a tiny roadside shrine built to Mercurius Sub Rosa, an unofficial god of secrets, luck, and stylish deception. His statue wears a lopsided smirk and naturally a cloak painted in the idea of purple. People have left offerings, fake coins, lost buttons, scraps of fabric. One note reads, "For the robe I wear when no one's looking." You light a tiny oil lamp and leave behind a thread from the Cyrene cloth. Just one. As you walk back, you pass a weaver's stall where a woman is experimenting with colors. She offers you a piece of dyed linen she calls Storm Root Dusk. It's somewhere between brown and defiance. "I sell to philosophers," she says. "They love vague colors." You buy it. Later that day, you attend a minor festival, one of those half-religious, half-excuse for grapes affairs in the Aventine Gardens. There's music, and masked performers act out a satire of Rome's color politics. The villain, a snail in a crown-hoarding dye and laughing maniacally. A girl in the audience yells, "Kick him," and the crowd roars with joy as a puppet senator dunks the snail into a vat of vinegar. The emperor reportedly loved the performance. Someone behind you mutters, "If we're laughing, maybe we're healing." You hope so. That night, as you walk through the quiet streets, you realize how much things have changed, not just in law, but in mood. People still want color. They still want meaning. But they're no longer chasing perfection. They're chasing expression. A young man dances alone under a street torch, his cloak flaring behind him like sunset caught in linen. No one scolds him. An old widow sings softly while stitching dark blue flowers onto her scarf. Children splash puddles, giggling about how the water turns their clothes secret purple. The loss no longer feels like absence. It feels like invitation. You return home and unfold your bundle of scraps. Indigo, bark-dyed red, iron-tinged black, and your beloved Cyrene piece now drying from a fresh rinse. You light a small candle and hold the fabric up. It doesn't look like power. It looks like history, mystery, persistence. Tomorrow you'll take it to a tailor and commission something modest. Not for display, not for statement, just for you. Because purple wasn't always about being seen. Sometimes it was about knowing you belonged, even if no one else noticed, especially then. Morning comes quietly like a breath held too long. The city is slow to stir. No temple bells ring. No market cries pierce the air. It's as if Rome itself has paused, waiting maybe for something it can't name. You head out early down the marble steps behind the Temple of Concord, past mossy fountains and the neighborhood cats already staking out sunbeams. You're not here for errands or rumors today. You're here to see it. In a tucked-away chamber beneath the imperial treasury, well-guarded, rarely visited lies what many whisper about, but few have ever truly seen the emperor's last purple robe. You've heard about it, of course. Everyone has. Some say it's cursed. Others say it was woven by blind priestesses in a single night and never worn as no moment proved worthy. One rumor even claims it was dyed with the blood of a single giant murex fed only on sacred seaweed and regret. You walk past the guards who barely glance up. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they think you're another scribe sent to inventory imperial textiles. Maybe they don't care anymore. Inside the chamber, it's dim and cold. A single oil lamp flickers in the corner, casting long shadows across the walls. At the center of the room, a low stone pedestal, and on it, carefully folded and sealed beneath a thin layer of waxed glass, rests the robe. It doesn't glow. It doesn't sparkle. It's not embroidered with suns or eagles or stars. It is deep, quiet, so dark it looks almost black. But when the flame catches it at the right angle, there it is. Tyrian purple. Not a ghost of it. Not a forgery. The real thing. You feel it immediately, not in your eyes, but in your chest. Like standing too close to a storm you didn't know was coming. You're not alone. An older man stands in the corner. He says nothing at first, just watches you. First time seeing it, he finally asks. You nod. Strange, isn't it? He murmurs. That something so small could mean so much. You ask him what will happen to it. He shrugs. That depends. Some want it burned. A symbol. A goodbye. Others want it paraded again. Let people believe we still have control. And you ask. He steps forward, hands clasped behind his back. I think it should stay exactly here. Hidden. Untouched. Not for display. Not for worship. Just remembered. Historians still debate the robe's origin. Some claim it was woven in Sidon by the last true Tyrian guild. Others say it was dyed in secret under moonlight by a cult that believed purple connected mortals to divinity. One thing is certain, it was never worn. Too perfect. Too final. You leave the chamber in silence. Outside, the wind carries the sound of street vendors slowly returning to life. A woman hawks roasted chickpeas, a boy chases pigeons with a stick, and a war cry that startles an entire Senate aide into spilling scrolls everywhere. You turn down a narrow alley that leads to one of the lesser-known tailors, the same one you visited earlier, the one experimenting with stormroot dusk. She welcomes you in with a grin and a raised eyebrow. You've seen it, haven't you? You don't need to ask what it means. You hand her the Cyrene scrap. I want something simple, you say. No status, no statement. Just a memory. She nods. No trim, no trim. Belt. You think, cord, black. She goes to work. While she measures, you hear whispers from the street. More color raids. A merchant fined for selling pomegranate red with too much undertone. A senator's wife arrested for wearing a shawl described as accidentally evocative. People are growing tired. Tired of rules that shift like desert winds. Tired of needing permission to feel beautiful. Tired of looking over their shoulders for robe inspectors. And then, just as your tunic is halfway done, a child bursts into the shop. Come quickly, she shouts. It's happening. You rush outside with a handful of strangers. In the central square, a platform has been erected. A young woman stands atop it, holding what looks like a banner in both hands. She unfurls it. It's patchwork, dozens of shades sewn together. plum and lilac charcoal and mauve scraps of Tyrian imitation and honest wool-dyed berry. Rough stitches hold it all. No symmetry, no order, just defiance. She raises her voice. This is what you gave us. Bits, scraps, fear. She pauses. This is what we made. And she wraps herself in it. The crowd watches, breath caught in the moment. No one moves. Then slowly someone starts to clap. Another joins. A third whistles. Soon the square is echoing, not with protest, not with worship, but with release. Someone shouts, "Long live scrapwork." Someone else yells, "I'm wearing eggplant and no one can stop me." A third adds, "That's not eggplant. That's regret." They laugh. You laugh. Because finally Rome is in grieving color. It's using it. You walk back to the Taylor Heartlighter wind cooler. Your tunic is ready. You try it on. It fits. Not like armor. Not like ceremony, but like skin. Later that night, as you light a small oil lamp and fold the Cyrene cloth into a drawer, you feel something shift inside. The emperor still has his robe. The city still has its chaos. But you have your own color now. The next morning, you wake before the city does. Your new tunic, simple storm-dyed, stitched by hand, rests folded on the stool beside your bed. It still holds a faint trace of the alchemist's scent oak bark indigo time. You slip it on like a second self. Outside, the streets are hushed. Even the pigeons seem uncertain. You make your way toward the Capitoline, where a quiet but momentous event is about to begin. Not a festival, not a ceremony, something stranger. The Senate has called an emergency convocation not for war or law or scandal, but for fashion. Specifically for a decision on what to do about the chaos that color has become. You arrive just in time to squeeze in with the growing crowd around the curia. Merchants, artisans, priests, soldiers, beggars. Everyone has gathered, because everyone has something to wear and something to lose. The senators file in wearing a mosaic of desperation. Some have returned to white. Some drape themselves in safe beige and sullen gray. A few dare to wear red gold, even green, but every choice carries risk. One senator in saffron mutters, "It's not purple, it's citrus adjacent." Another bolder wears a robe of faded plum and carries a scroll of dye permits thicker than a law code. You find a spot under a shaded arch as the emperor's representative rises. He's not dressed in purple. He's not even dressed in smoke. He's wearing brown, and that's when the city truly understands. Something is about to end. He speaks without preamble. The robe crisis, he says, is no longer about dye. It is about division, fear, absurdity. He holds up a piece of parchment. This, he says, is a bill drafted to abolish the lex purpurae. A gasp ripples through the crowd. No more fines for plum tunics. No more trials for violet sashes. No more color tribunals. He pauses. No more fear of expression. The reaction is instant. Some cheer, some scream. A senator faints dramatically into a clerk's arms. A woman nearby says, "Finally, I can wear my eggplant sandals again." Historians still argue about this moment. Some say the repeal was politically motivated, a clever way to distract from deeper unrest. Others believe it was an act of mercy, an acknowledgement that Rome's obsession with status had tipped into satire. But one thing no historian disputes: it changed everything. You watch as senators argue over implementation. Should there be a transition period? Should previously punished citizens be reimbursed? Should the emperor's private snail reserve be distributed? Yes, that's real. And no, it's not open to the public. While they argue, the crowd swells. A boy dances in a violet scarf. A baker proudly wears a stained apron that looks vaguely imperial, though more likely flavored with grape jam than murex. And somewhere in the back, a group of women dressed in deep blue unfurl a banner. We bleed color. You turn to leave. This moment doesn't belong to officials. It belongs to people. You pass a courtyard where laundresses gather. They're grinning, waving bolts of cloth overhead. One says, "We burn the beige pile." Another lifts a tunic dyed in bruised lilac. 3 months of stolen scraps. Worth it. You smile. You stop in the market where dye vendors are already rebranding. One sells post-Tyrian twilight. Another offers new royal. A third, more honest, has labeled his booth. It's purplish. Deal with it. You buy a sash, not bright, not loud. Just a cool, worn violet that feels like the end of a long argument. As you walk back toward the river, you hear music. Not a march, not a hymn, just music. Spontaneous. A man plays a lyre beside a child wearing a self-made toga with mismatched purple stripes. She dances like nobody's watching. Except everyone is. And no one stops her. You pass the Temple of Janus. Its doors are halfway closed. A priest nods to you. Peace, perhaps. You nod back, or at least permission. That night, a procession winds through the Subura. No guards, no banners. Just people carrying torches and wearing every hue the city once banned. Some wear purple, some wear black streaked with violet. Some wear robes dyed with onion skins and wild berries. One man proudly yells, "This was made from crushed wine grapes and broken rules." You laugh. You join them. Because it's not a rebellion. Not anymore. It's a celebration. Not of one color, but of freedom from one color. As the procession winds past the forum, you glance up at the imperial banner. Still blank. Still white. But now it seems less like surrender, and more like canvas. The next morning, Rome is painted in color. Literally, someone or a dozen someones has gone through the streets with brushes, rags, and leftover dye, and splashed every blank surface they could reach. Archways drip with ochre. Statues wear cloaks of lilac and burgundy. A lamppost on the Appian Way is now unmistakably striped like a beetle's back. No one's cleaning it. In fact, by mid-morning, people are adding to it. You see an old senator draw a crooked violet sun on his villa's column. A child giggles as she presses a handprint of eggplant purple on a temple step. A merchant has painted a mural of a smiling murex snail saying, "I tried." And there beneath it, someone scrawled in red, "So did we." You walk through it, all tunic swaying in the breeze, the storm root dusk catching light just enough to draw second glances. No one asks if it's legal. No one needs to. You head to the Fabric Forum, what was once a stiff, rule-bound market square, where officials checked robes for authenticity and sniffed scarves like wine. Today, it's chaos, in the best sense. A vendor with gold thread earrings waves a cloth at you. New arrival, mulberry haze. Pairs well with disobedience. Another offers regret gray smells like last century. There's a cart labeled experimental vats use at own risk. A man climbs out of one looking like a wine stain with eyes. You laugh until your ribs hurt. Because for once, Rome isn't obsessing over identity, it's playing with it. You stop at a corner booth where a girl no older than 10 sells tiny patches fabric stitched into tiny wearable flags. Each is different. Some striped, some blotched, a few clean and proud. You ask what they are. She shrugs. Fragments. From the people who couldn't wear them before. Now we share them. You buy one dark plum hand-dyed, roughly cut. You pin it to your sash. She beams. As you walk on, someone stops you. A guard. For a moment, instinct grips you. The old fear. But he only points to your pin and says, "That's a nice shade. Is it bark-based?" Partially, you answer. He nods. Looks solid. Better than the cabbage trend last month. You part ways with a mutual shrug of artistic resignation. Historians still argue over this day. Some call it the dye carnival. Others call it the second founding, the rebirth of Rome, not as an empire of conformity, but a mosaic of layered traditions. A few snootier scribes dismiss it as the day Rome dressed like a drunk mosaic. You keep walking, and by the time you reach the Temple of Vesta, the steps are packed. Not with priests, with tailors. They're holding a council. Yes, a tailor's council. It was inevitable. They stand in a loose ring swatches pinned to their chests, debating standards not to enforce, but to inspire. "We should rename purple," someone yells. To what another replies, "Eternal plum, forbidden hue. How about legacy ink? I vote for snail regret." Laughter breaks the tension. Someone throws a spool of thread like a javelin. Someone else ducks behind a mannequin in fear. The mannequin wins. And from this ridiculous scene, something new begins. Not rules, not decrees, just guidelines. One weaver proposes an annual festival of shades where citizens debut their most daring dye attempts. Another suggests robes should bear a tag, not a price, but a story. Tell people where the color came from, who touched it, what failed along the way. The youngest among them, a boy not yet old enough to own his own shop, says quietly, or maybe we just stop caring what people wear and listen to them instead. Silence follows that, and then a woman claps. Once, twice. The group follows. They disband, not with a law, but with a promise. You leave the temple steps and head toward the riverside. There you find the priestess from Minerva's temple. She's sitting under a fig tree sewing a new robe, not for herself, for someone else. The cloth deep green, but at the seams tiny careful stitches of lavender thread. You ask her what changed. She smiles. We realized wisdom doesn't always wear gray. That evening, Rome glows, not with torches, but with color. Every wall, every robe, every stall tells a different story. No two purples match. No one tries to enforce a hierarchy. For the first time in memory, no one's arrested over cloth. Even the emperor steps out quietly, privately walking the streets like any other citizen. He wears white, but his belt? A narrow cord, woven with strands of 7 different hues. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. As the stars rise, the city exhales. For centuries, it worshipped a single color. Tonight, it celebrates all of them. And you sit by the river, hand on your sash, heartful, thinking, maybe this isn't the end of an empire. Maybe this is what it looks like when an empire grows up. The morning arrives, soft, pale, and golden, the kind of Rome morning that feels painted by someone who only ever worked in pastels. The sky blushes pink at the edges. The rooftops steam gently from last night's dew. For once, the city breathes without performance. And you're ready. You make your way to the outskirts of the Aventine Hill to a quiet villa that belonged once upon a time to a senator who obsessed over trim width and toga etiquette. He's long gone. The villa was left to his niece, a weaver, and she turned it into a studio. A place for learning, experimenting, failing out loud. Today it's hosting a gathering. Not a council, not a court. A circle. No scrolls, no guards, no titles. Just color. You arrive to find fabrics hung across olive trees like prayer flags. Robes of every hue. Garments once hidden now displayed with a kind of gentle defiance. Some are stitched from scraps. Others are made of freshly woven cloth. None of them match. That's the point. You greet an old friend from the dye cellars. He's brought 3 bolts of a new blend walnut and woad soot and lavender. He calls it echo dust. A child runs past trailing a banner painted with overlapping handprints. Purple ones, red, gold, even green with notes scribbled beside each mom's first attempt. Oops, but still pretty surprise color from an onion. An elderly senator, yes. A real one stands near the fig trees wearing a robe dyed soft indigo. His purple days are over, but he holds his chin high. When someone compliments the cloth, he says, "My granddaughter made it. I wear what matters now." Someone offers you a seat. You sit in the circle. A young woman steps forward with a jar. She dips her fingers into it and pulls them out stained true Tyrian. The real thing! She lifts her hands, shows them to the crowd. Then, without a word, she wipes them gently on her robe. One streak across the chest. Not to flaunt. To remember. She passes the jar. Some people touch it, some don't. You do. The color warms your fingertips. You look at your tunic plain stormroot dusk and press your hand gently to the hem. When you lift it, the smear glows faintly like a wound healing in reverse. And that's when you know purple was never about power. It was about memory, about marking something you loved enough to carry. Historians still argue how Rome transitioned from purple panic to chromatic calm. Some say the dye scarcity ended with science. Others claim the laws simply collapsed under the weight of laughter and loss. But ask anyone who lived through it and they'll tell you, it ended the day we stopped needing color to tell us who we were. As the sun rises higher, someone begins to hum. Others join. A slow, warm tune. Not sacred, not state-sponsored, just shared. The circle stands. Robes ripple in the breeze. Fabric flutters like sails finding wind. You walk away slowly past the gates through streets still painted from yesterday's dye storm. A man sweeps petals into a mosaic. A girl draws vines in chalk on the side of a bakery. And on a wall near your lodging, someone has scrawled in blue charcoal-y. We lost the color but found the thread. You touch your sash. The violet scrap from Cyrene is still stitched to its corner. Worn now, frayed, but undeniable. You've carried it through silence and satire, through courts and temples, through bees and bannings and bathtubs of bad dye. And it's still here, just like Rome, still imperfect, still experimenting, still alive. As evening falls, the sky purples not because of politics, but because it always did. Long before emperors, long before snails. And as stars flicker into view, you lie back in the grass above the Palatine exhale and think, maybe the color never left. Maybe it just needed to fade, so we could learn how to see it again. The city quiets. Torches flicker low. Fountains hush. Even the breeze seems to tiptoe now, brushing across linen and stone with careful ease. You're lying on your back, the grass still warm beneath you. The stars above blink slowly like they're watching you watch them. The weight of the story begins to dissolve, not disappear, just soften, like a robe pulled gently from your shoulders. The streets behind you glow with scattered lamplight. Someone hums a lullaby in the next courtyard. You hear a cat leap to a tiled roof. The kind of sound that only happens when everything else is finally still. You reach up and brush the thread on your sash. Your little piece of legacy tucked and stitched and smudged with a memory that doesn't ask to be explained. It just stays. The empire still moves, but slower, kinder. It doesn't need to wear purple to be powerful anymore. And you don't need a robe to feel like you matter. You've seen how quickly symbols can vanish, how fast color fades. But you've also seen what stays behind when it does. Laughter memory, people helping each other stitch the world back together. So close your eyes now. Let the weight of Rome fall away. Let your breath slow. Let the silence settle into something gentle and full. Because the color is gone, but the story lingers. And in the quiet of the night, under a sky too vast for borders, too deep for law, and just purple enough to hold a little magic, you rest and you dream.